My name is Uri Middleman. I'm the president of UWB Startup Club. Welcome to our first podcast episode. Today, I'm talking with Chris DeVore. Chris is a founding managing partner of Founders Co-op, the leading seed stage venture fund in the Pacific Northwest. Just last month, they announced their sixth fund to continue backing what Chris calls unreasonable humans doing amazing things. Before focusing fully on the fund, he spent a decade leading Techstars Seattle, where he invested in early local unicorns like Remitly, Outreach, and Auth0. But his roots are in building. He risked his job at Patagonia in the mid-1990s to convince the founders to launch their first online store. He is a champion of the Seattle ecosystem, a believer in the craft of entrepreneurship, and our first guest. Chris DeVore, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I had no idea this was the first episode. That's high stakes, high pressure.
Yeah,
We got
it's
to really
awesome. Yeah, I'm
deliver.
super grateful to have you on. Yeah, it's high
Okay.
stakes. Hopefully
Good.
it goes well. In my reading on you, I read that you're like a longtime pizza enthusiast, and I was wondering if your go-to order is still Mama Lil's peppers with sausage, or have you pivoted to something else?
It's funny. We make pizza at home every Friday, and I have kids who are now in college, but the kids' preferences tended to shape what we did. So
Mhm.
my daughter's cheese only, so there was a lot of just cheese in the house, and then my son has more adventurous taste. So in fact, he texted me last week saying, "Whatever happened to our olive and prosciutto pizza? Can we bring that back?" So different audiences, different requirements.
Okay, so you appeal to the kids. That makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you have any other sort of traditions like that that sort of ground you?
I mean, that's a good question. We all like I'm a couple years older than you. We all develop habits over time that keep us sane and grounded. I think for me, as a former college athlete, one of the things that I have to do is get outside and move.
Mhm.
So I that changes as your body gets older, but I still am pretty active in the outdoors, and so that's living in the Northwest is one of the big reasons why I live here, and one of the reasons why you mentioned Patagonia, why I sort of took a little bit of a detour to work for that company back in the day is the community of people who are active outdoor athletes is
Mhm.
is something that's continuing to be of interest to me. So
So you talked about Patagonia and sort of your path to get there. You were at Edgar Dunn and then AT&T. And I was wondering, you've talked about autonomy being your number one driver, and I was wondering when did you first recognize this about yourself?
yeah, no, I think it's a good question. I'm glad you kind of fingered that as a through line for what I do because I think one of the things that I figured out about myself and then recursively one of the things that I really love about working with founders is they tend to be people who are and I can use positive or negative words for this, but they tend to be dissatisfied, right? They don't just want to fit into a system. They tend to push at the boundaries of the
Hmm.
system and want to do things differently or faster or better or sort of make change. And I think I discovered that, when you're young and just starting out, you feel lucky to have a job and you sort of plug yourself into a system and you do your best to be productive and keep your job. But then at some point I started to realize, hey, there's just like I am impatient to have an impact. And a lot of systems aren't really looking for that kind of impatience. They want you to stay in your lane and stay in your box and do your thing. And for a lot of people, I think that's okay. It's like their job is part of their life and it fits in their life, and they don't put a lot of themselves into it. They just do what it takes to keep employed. And I think a lot of people who become entrepreneurs tend to be people who that the dissatisfaction is so significant that they ultimately take what's a highly irrational career risk, right? Which is like, I'm gonna risk getting fired or I'm gonna quit or whatever it is because I can't stand not having more agency.
Hmm.
And I think as I discovered that about myself, I sort of first started pursuing that on my own and kind of working towards the founder journey, which I found myself on later on. But like I didn't grow up thinking like my dad was a lawyer. I didn't grow up in a risk-seeking kind of environment. It was very much a discovered preference for me. And then once I figured it out, I started looking for other people in the world who had that same preference, which led me to the founder community. And that's for me, that's always been the kind of most comfortable place for me to sit because I'm looking for people who have that similar sense of agency and desire for the world to be better and the hubris, I guess, to believe that they can be a part of making the world a better place.
So you talked about that risk-taking behavior. You bet your job at Patagonia on the internet. I was wondering how did you get that confidence to take that risk?
Well, and again, it's like it's one of those things that didn't, in retrospect, it seems irrational. But I had moved. I'd been working for Macaw Cellular, and then Macaw was bought by AT&T, which I'd worked for previously, and I knew I didn't want to be a part of a company that big again. And so Patagonia was very much a left turn. I've been doing, basically software and hardware integrated product work for in the telecoms business. Patagonia doesn't have any of those. I was managing what's called the technical lines, but to them, technical means technical fabrics that are manufactured offshore for waterproof performance, that kind of a thing. So it was very much a left turn career wise, but I loved the brand and the community that they served. And it was an incredible learning experience to work with Yvonne and Melinda Chenard, who were the founders and owners, were, I think, just brilliant, intuitive, non-obvious kind of path-breaking entrepreneurs in their own right. But when I went, it was 1995, and so the internet had really just begun to emerge. And because I've been working in telecom, I had sort of an early lens. The first wave of the internet bubble was very telecom centric in terms of like laying the pipes to be able to deliver high bandwidth services. So it was in my head, and I couldn't help thinking that, like, because I was excited about it, that the Chenard should be excited about it too. And I was just frustrated. I was like, what do you mean you aren't interested? You don't think computers matter? Like, come on, you guys. So to me, it was just one of those things where it was so obvious to me that this is where their customers were going to be.
Hmm.
And if you love the brand and you want the brand to be successful, you just say, hey, like this has to happen. And I had completed kind of a chunk of work or basically a reorganization of the group that I was working in. So there was sort of a moment when I could say, hey, I've done the first thing you asked me to do. I really think this is important. It's important enough to me to basically say, hey, let's just create a role for me that you could like let's de-risk for you the decision. So I got to do what I wanted by de-risking for them the stakes, which is like, hey, we're not going to put a lot of money and we're not going to create a new department or anything else. We're going to give you a temporary role and a temporary title and a little bit of carte blanche to go figure it out and see what happens. So it was a way for me to be able to do what I thought the company needed to do, um, and to de-risk the decision because institutions, even entrepreneurial institutions like Patagonia, are risk averse, right? When you have something to lose, you tend to be more defensive. And so an entrepreneurial strategy is to figure out how to de-risk a decision for people so that it feels less scary.
Yeah.
And you'll often find that, with startups, like if you sell to the enterprise, instead of being like, hey, buy my product for $1 million a year, it's like, well, let's do a pilot. Let's just let you try it. Like
Hmm.
you try to find ways of making something bite size so that more risk averse organizations can take a risk on you without it feeling so scary.
Hmm. Do you feel about AI the same way you felt about the internet? If you were at like a Patagonia-like company, would you stake yourself out or stake your job out again on AI? Do you have any ideas like that today or?
Yeah, great question. And I think there's a bunch of different ways that we can go with that if you're
Hmm.
curious. So one of the things that can make you cynical about working in the innovation industry is the venture capital industry in particular always wants there to be a new thing
Hmm.
because it tends to manufacture investor enthusiasm and acquirer enthusiasm and talent enthusiasm. So if you've been in the business, I've been doing this for about 18 years as a professional investor. And so you've seen multiple cycles and different, it's like a Rorschach test. Which innovation do you think matters and which doesn't? But having been at the beginning, like the first wave of the internet, and then the cloud infrastructure era and open source and mobile, there have been some pretty significant waves of sort of technology innovations or just disruptions, if you think of it that way. But then there have also been things that, whether it's drones. I mean, now drones have a strong military pull, but the first wave, there was a lot of enthusiasm about UAVs that was sort of, like uh, automatic delivery of consumer products and that sort of thing, which I think have yet to bear fruit. There was the whole metaverse thing. I don't know if you were around for that, but for a while, and Meta, even Facebook rebranded itself as Meta and
Yeah.
decided the world was all going to be. It's like, well, maybe not. Bitcoin or crypto, which I admit I continue to be something of a skeptic about. Everyone has different views about this. So it's helpful to have a little bit of the tide comes in, the tide goes out lens on what's real and what's not. I think the LLM wave is probably the most exciting wave of foundational technology I've seen as a professional investor since, I don't know, since mobile. So it's been quite a while. The thing that I think is also interesting is, and this is more the capital markets, like there's the technology lens, which is this a useful technology that changes the way people do business? And I think the view is absolutely. And then there's the investor lens, which is the way that the build out of LLM based innovation being capitalized, does it make sense? And the same thing was true in the first wave of the internet bubble, which is a huge amount of telecom investment, and the valuations of telecom companies were really essentially obviously inflated relative to their ability to capture cash flow, long-term cash flows, durable cash flows that would pay for the valuations that they were inheriting. That was recognized in the crash, the internet bubble popping in 2000, 2001. And the benefit was all the money flooding into telecom in that era built out a huge amount of infrastructure that when the bottom fell out became very low cost kind of pipes that allowed the second wave of the internet to be built on low cost transport, high bandwidth transport. I think the same thing is going to happen in the LLM wave, which is a lot of really exciting work is going to be done around how do you build and train models more efficiently? How do you power inference more efficiently? But I think a lot of the money that's going into that cycle and some of the companies that are very richly valued today are not going to survive the reset.
Hmm.
But the foundational technology will be carried forward. And so like it's not like the money in the current bubble will be wasted, but I think there will be some significant losers from that currently look like very valuable companies that are not going to be able to sustain it. And that's I think when you think about if you love technology and innovation and business, to be able to decouple what is a real innovation from how is that innovation being financed and does that make sense? And to
Hmm.
think of those as two different planes of strategic effort is a useful lens for any kind of technology innovation. Because if you conflate the innovation and the money, you can get confused about where value really lies. And I think it's just helpful to have a critical eye on to pick apart what causes companies to be valuable, which is durable, high margin cash flows, and what do investors value highly in the current market, which tends to be more speculative. Think of it that way.
Hmm. what you say, it really resonates with me with the things I talk about with my friends. Like, I have one friend who loves talking about how Fluly is the new hype, their marketing is amazing. He doesn't really talk about their revenue or how they're, I'm pretty sure they're really just becoming a meetings notes app. So it's interesting how when you're looking at it from an investor lens, you have to sort of ground yourself. Um, but yeah, I was wondering, you mentioned a lot of emerging technologies. I was wondering how you like evaluate those different ones, how you evaluate crypto versus the metaverse, and how now with LLMs there's going to be all that structure and yeah, I was wondering about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like a lot of to zoom out on what my job is, right? Which is I am essentially a money manager. I raise money from high net worth individuals and family offices and institutional investors and deploy it in innovation with the promise of returning them a risk adjusted premium return on what they could get in other kinds of less risky, more liquid investments. So, like a lot of professional investors, I think you come at that with a certain humility about like what causes long. And again, a fund investment fund lasts 10 or 12 years. Our investments are illiquid for years and years. Like once you make a bet, you can't get the money back. So a lot of people in my job tend to be students of other high performing investors, and you obviously like Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, um, people who have built their reputations over decades as high performing money managers. And I think you get really kind of grounded in what is the foundation of business value, and I think you become kind of a fundamentalist about its ethical, hardworking people diligently trying to solve problems for customers in a defensible way that produces durable high margin cash flows over time, right? And so if that's your litmus test and you look at the behaviors in certain kinds of innovation, anything that sort of has too much promotion, too much hucksterism, too much kind of quick buck artist, like you just immediately are skeptical
Hmm.
because there's a difference between tricking people into buying something at a high price over a short duration and building a machine that produces high margin cash flows over time. And fundamentally, if you're in that's the second one is based on trust and ethical behavior. Like that's the foundation of durable business value. And so you tend to have a strong litmus test for the motivations and values of the people that you work with. So it's an easy filter is does this feel like people are really on fire about a foundational technology, or are they trying to make a quick buck? And not that those two can't get confused,
Hmm.
but it's not that hard to cut through the bullshit if you really if it's something smells like too good to be true hucksterism, it probably is.
I was wondering, you were talking about litmus tests, and that reminded me, you wrote a really interesting blog post about how to evaluate different org charts or different early startups org charts, their hiring plans, and the last one was their cap table. And I was wondering how how did you get to this how did you get this insight?
Um, Good. By the way, I'm impressed with your level of diligence. You've done a lot of homework. Thank you
Thank you.
for investing the time in in the preparation. Um, One of I guess another sort of dualism, if you want to think about it that way, about learning what kind of a learner you are as a human is a really powerful meta cognition about who you are and what you need to be productive or successful. One of the things that I figured out about myself is, and this is true of I think a lot of people who have the same kind of entrepreneurial mindset, is I learn better the hard way, meaning I can be told something a bunch of times, but until I put that idea into practice and seen the results for myself, it's hard for me to really take it on board and internalize it. One of the luxuries I've had over the past almost 20 years as an investor is between the Techstars program and the fund, I and my partner Aviel have made like almost 300 first check investment decisions. And in many cases, particularly in Techstars, where those teams sat in our office for the first 3 months of their lives, we've been able to see so many entrepreneurial journeys, the beginnings at least, play out. The ability to learn, particularly when you have your own money and other people's money at risk, it's a much more searing experience to lose money in something than to just be speculating or learning about it by reading a book. So the benefit of having stayed alive as an investor that long is I've just seen the movie so many times, and many of the learnings about behavior and org charts and prioritization, which are distilled in some of those blog posts, were really learned by observation, by having money at risk and my time and career and reputation at risk in helping teams try to be successful. And when it works, trying to figure out what are the patterns of success that cause things to work, and when it doesn't work, which is much more frequent, trying to pick apart like what went wrong, what could I have done differently, what could the founders have done differently, what were the mistakes that were made that caused that thing to that seemed so promising at the beginning to not ultimately work. And it can be hard to explain the root of an insight because it's based on a long history and lots of evidence. But it is that sort of exercise of trying to distill both in the positive and the more frequent negative cases what went wrong here. Um,
Is there an example, like a specific example where there was a negative case where like, oh shucks, I should have recognized that their hiring plan they didn't account for XYZ or something like that.
all the time. I mean, I think in any one of those observations, and I would say the one probably that sort of the next layer under is one of the biggest failures that an investor can make, and I have made countless times, is falling in love with the idea of what the company wants to do and allowing that enthusiasm for the insight cloud your perception or allow you to sort of elide over obvious weaknesses or shortcomings in the founding team. And I think the thing you always have to do, the inversion, which is the Mungerism, like always invert. The inversion you have to do every time when you're evaluating an investment is set aside whatever it is that they're doing, whatever the team has chosen to do. Let that not be the high order bit in your selection process. Really focus on the humans and their capabilities. Again, back to if you believe that like committed excellence, ethics, and determination on individuals and teams is the root cause of success. It doesn't almost doesn't matter what the team is choosing to do. If you have conviction that the team has merit, you can follow them in lots of directions and wind up in a good place. If you squint and say, well, I can see how this team has some weaknesses, but I really like the thing that they want to go do, that's the thing that tends to get you in trouble.
Mhm.
And the way that you can identify the weaknesses is by the choices that people make about how they interact with you, how they interact with others, if they're presenting a plan, how what because any plan includes an implicit resource allocation prioritization. You can say, look, I'm going to go all in on my engineering team and we're not going to hire sales for another year. You know they're very committed to building product and not that focused on go to market, and that's has its strengths and weaknesses. If they're like, look, I'm going to hire a bunch of marketing people to tell a bunch of stories, but not going to hire engineers for 6 months, you're like, you guys don't really, you're not really committed to building a software product here. You're trying to create buzz, but there's nothing behind it. That's a simplistic example of how decision making or planning can make someone's values legible. And then you have to look at the values and be like, do I want to be in business with someone that has these values, irrespective of the path they've chosen to follow as an entrepreneur.
So people is the most important thing as a seed stage and pre-seed stage, right? And I
I
was
mean, it's
thinking,
the most important thing in life, right? Whether
yeah,
it's you
yeah,
choosing your friends or your life
mhm,
partner, it's like choose wisely because you are there's a truism out there. I did not make this up, which is like you are the average of the five people you spend the most time with.
mhm,
And so,
yeah.
so your choices not only reflect your values, but shape your values. And the environment you place yourself in and prioritize becomes the water that you're swimming in, and you stop seeing the water after a while because that becomes your world.
What values do you look for in these unreasonable people that you want to invest in?
Yeah, I mean, and again, values is kind of a loaded word. I'll try to make it more abstract with just sort of attributes.
Hmm.
One thing that and again, I need to always sort of back up. Building anything new, whether it's a company or a startup or an artwork. Think of it's a creative act requires a kind of obsessive mindset, which is somebody who's so curious about something that they go way beyond superficial. Like they're sort of relentless, obsessive curiosity about a problem. And that kind of obsession can seem weird to people, which is like, why do you care so much about fill in the blank? But somebody who's really interested not in the trappings of something, but in the foundational, like, why is it that this particular business process is done this way, or why is it that uh, an idea that I think should exist has never existed before, and not just running blindly to say this must exist because I think it should, but really saying like, what are all the analogs that have been tried before, and why didn't those work, and how do I talk to a lot of people? How do I not just use what's in my head to assume that that's what the world needs? How do I gather as a ton of information from talking to lots of people? So being obsessively curious about the thing that you want to pursue is sort of number one. Because absent that level of kind of depth and obsession, it's really hard. Like it's so hard to do anything of lasting value. You need to be sort of bizarrely obsessed and durably obsessed with it. That's number one. I think the another one that's and the idea of asking other people is another is sort of a vector, another vector I want to go down. Often people who have the confidence in themselves to want to do something that's different can be overconfident in themselves. They can be so sure they're right that they don't listen very well. Their ears don't work, is another way to put it. And so having an obsession and a curiosity about something, but not being so sure that your insight is the right insight, but always wanting to stress test your thinking with other people's feedback. And again, it's just sort of a knife edge thing, which is extreme obsession and confidence and insight or curiosity about a vector, but also the humility to be like, hey, I probably don't have all the answers here. That dualism, that sort of yin yang combination of confidence and not uncertainty, but curiosity about like or willingness to kind of beat up your idea in the arena or the landscape of ideas is also very rare. It often skews towards hubris and arrogance and misidentification of your own idea with the right idea. Those are really powerful. And then a third one, and this really gets to kind of building companies. Like ultimately, if you're an artist and you just create something by yourself in your studio, you don't need other people. Like I mean, for them, I mean, you might need a dealer to help you sell the stuff. But building a company is a super complex thing, right? Because there's the product, which is engineering and design and storytelling, and then there's the go to market, which is how do you get anybody to care, and then there's organizational capacity, which is like once you built something and people want to buy it, how do you support those customers? How do you build organization? How do you lead and manage larger teams of people? So as you go through the journey of building a company, there's so many vectors of risk and opportunity. People who think they can do it all themselves, again, the sort of the hubris humility kind of duality. People who have confidence in their own strengths, but also see their own weaknesses and say, look, I can't do this all by myself. I need to bring other people along on the journey with me, and it's not me telling them what to do. I need true partners on the journey. So like co-founders who are better than me at other things, and I can accept that they're better than me and let them own those things. Again, it's a rare trait for somebody who has the confidence and energy to create something and the humility to know that they aren't good at everything and to let other things go and to trust other people to share in the creation of the thing that they've envisioned. Those are at the abstract level three very difficult, unique behavioral psychological kind of make profile characteristics that tend to create strong founders and founding teams. And again, that may not be the level of detail that you wanted, but that's a like it's often because again, it doesn't matter if you're making art or making a company or writing a book or building a political organization. That set of attributes is leadership distilled to some extent in having a direction, but also knowing how to make that direction productive and to bring other people along on the journey.
From reading some of your blog posts, it seems like you described oh, so hard to say, Yvon Chouinard, how the leadership of sort of being able to rely on your team. You said he wanted to be a leader that like doesn't have to be there at all. You can fully rely on the network that he's created for
Yeah, and I think I mean, all founders are complicated, and he is a complicated guy, right? Because, and I think one of the things that I found very confusing working for him, I was in my, mid late 20s, and so still trying to figure all this stuff out, is in Patagonia itself as a brand, it's like on the one hand, he's anti-consumer, really, or anti-capitalist, anti-growth, and yet he's a brilliant, intuitive marketer who's built a $1 billion enterprise and just trying to square the circle on those two preferences, like that alone. He also is, he wanted to be able to spend a lot of his time out in the field, like basically doing what he wanted, skiing, surfing, climbing mountains. But he also had a strong need for control in certain aspects of the business. And so I think that working for him, you got a little bit of whiplash of he would say and behave in a certain way and yet demand outcomes that seem to be at odds with that. And I think part of the benefit or the challenge of working with him is understanding that founders are complicated people, and getting to the right answer doesn't mean total intellectual consistency or even behavioral consistency. It's trying to sort of figure out how do you average to some extent the behaviors that I'm seeing. If I believe in the person and believe in the direction at a high level, how much day-to-day whiplash can I tolerate in service of the larger goal? And I think that's being able to tolerate that kind of ambiguity and not needing things to be clean and consistent is an aspect of working in entrepreneurial organizations. Whereas like once you work for a big company and everything's sort of done and you're really optimizing the business rather than inventing the business, it tends to be very clean and legible and internally consistent. When you're inventing or creating or growing a business, there's lots of churn and lots of change. And I think and I think just the Bezosism, which is you have to be like clear, very clear on the long term and very flexible in the short term. And I think that being able to tolerate that kind of ambiguity is a recipe for success or even just survival in entrepreneurial business. And I think Yvonne, for me, was my first real kind of being that close to the leadership and feeling the whiplash personally was hard, but a good seasoning experience for me.
So earlier you mentioned the three important values, or you said they're more like attributes for an investor, but I didn't hear you mentioning the chip on the shoulder. I was wondering how that sort of plays into that.
Yeah, and I think that's this is again, you've done your homework. I think one characteristic that we've seen for successful founders, and there's a blog post I wrote, which is probably among my most shared blog posts over the years, because that really struck a nerve, I think, with a lot of people who self-identified with this as founders, is often successful founder, like again, reminding you and myself, like being a founder is really hard, and being that isolated and that alone in your decision making for a long time requires a source of energy, a furnace, if you will, that can withstand a lot of setbacks. And one of the things that I found common for founders that weather that journey is that at some point in their life, somebody told them they weren't enough, they weren't good enough, they weren't smart enough, they weren't whatever it was. And their reaction, rather than taking that on board and saying, "Oh yeah, you're right, I'm maybe not that good, and I'll just have to put my tail between my legs," was basically, I don't know what language you want me to use on this. Basically, like, "Fuck you, I'm as good as anybody, even if you can't see it, and I'm going to prove it to you. I'm going to prove it to the world." And what's interesting about that mindset, if you see people with that mindset, it almost doesn't matter how successful they become. They can almost never lose that sense of like, I'm going to prove to the world that I'm good enough. And they can be CEO of a multi-billion dollar company, but inside the story they tell themselves is this could all go away in a minute, and everyone is doubting me, and the only way I can feel good about myself is every day to show up and prove that I'm better than people think I am. And again, that's not a necessarily a healthy psychological framework, right? It's like it's very, you're it's a combination of doubting yourself and needing to prove yourself as a way to assuage the doubt. It's psychologically uncomfortable, but that is a pattern that I've seen many, many successful founders carry forward. Is they're not big, patting themselves on the back and thinking they're the smartest guy in the room. They're really secretly afraid that they aren't good enough. And the way they prove it to themselves and to the world is every day showing up and being more than, right?
How do you distinguish something like that and also the values that you sort of look for from arrogance? You said that um, the founders need to not have the arrogance to think that they can do everything. How do you sort of see that in a first meeting, or where
Yeah,
do you
yeah. Good,
look at
really
that?
good question. And again, like we have to make decisions pretty quickly as
Mhm.
investors. You don't get a lot of data. And if the company doesn't exist yet or hasn't existed, there's not a lot of data to work with. So one of the best ways is to basically ask probing questions. And often when you get into it with somebody, if someone who's genuinely curious about a topic, their reaction to a hard question, a probing question, or a question that surprises them is to get really engaged intellectually and be like, oh, that's a really interesting question. I hadn't thought about that. Tell me more. Why do you have that question? Or uh, let's talk about that and give me some examples from your experience and how I can think differently. So whereas someone who is more fragile in their which arrogance tends to be fragile, right? It's like it's really armor around a weaker shell, but they tend to be defensive and they start defending why they're right or why their idea is correct or like how could you be so stupid? How can you not see that I'm right here? So that all by itself is a pretty significant tell. And you can people fake curiosity? Sure, I guess they can. But usually someone's body language when if you get into a not an adversarial, but like just like a challenging or a like let's unpack this together kind of thing. The people who really lean forward and are excited to have a challenging conversation about something that they thought a lot about and hold dearly is a pretty good indicator of their how much they're curiosity driven versus the need to be right or the need to be the smartest person in the room.
You've talked about Zen archery in the past, and I was wondering, how does that play into your philosophy today?
So just for folks who aren't as familiar with the concept, and again, this is another Ivanism. Ivan was a student of Buddhism, and so he would bring into conversations some of the things that he'd taken away from his reading or studying about Buddhist practice. And one analogy that he really loved was this idea of the Zen archer. And so in archery, obviously, like you're shooting an arrow at a target, and the goal is to be as close to the center of the target as possible. And the way Ivan sort of related the story of what he learned about Zen archery was the archer in Zen practice is more focused on perfecting every step, which is like, is all of my equipment in perfect order? Am I approaching it with the right mindset? Am I notching the arrow with thoughtfulness? Like so, everything about what they're doing was making sure that they were approaching the task with total focus, and that if they did that, that the arrow would naturally strike the center. Like it wasn't about the goal; it was about perfection and attention to the process. And I think the takeaway around that is, again, if and to abstract it in the crudest terms, if you think as a founder that your goal is to get rich, you're missing the point. If the goal is to build an enterprise of value that does important work for customers and brings along a team of committed people, you focus much more. The attention you pay is to the micro task. Am I bringing the right people on to the organization? Does the product do what it promises to do for customers? Do I have a way of listening to customers so I identify the defects in the product and can correct them? If you bring that spirit of attention and you attune yourself to what's not correct about my process, you are much more likely to achieve the goal than if you try to work backwards from I want to be rich, so I'm going to build a startup and raise a bunch of money and sell it for a bunch of money and then I'm going to be rich. That tends to not work out as well as the bottoms up attention to detail. And again, this is a framework. You can't say that it's always true or that people who don't like, or you can have both ideas in your head at the same time. Like none of this is pure, but I think it's a powerful idea to help people think about where should my attention be focused. Because at the end of the day, that's all you have in your life is your time and your attention. And giving people good advice about how to focus their attention is often the best advice you can give them.
I think we should double click into sort of the process part of it. You said that um, founders are like master storytellers and that sometimes they have grand visions. How do you balance process excellence versus a vision that might seem very enticing, but the process might not be there?
Good, a great question. Another kind of one of the foundational dualities of effective founders. Typically you have people who are specialist in one or the other, right? You've got, and I don't know if you know, Myers-Briggs, I think is a maligned framework, but I think there's some interesting aspects. If you've seen it, one of the dualities, Myers-Briggs is, if for those who don't know it, is essentially a four attribute spectrum that people can self-assess on. And one of the attributes is N versus S, which is intuitive versus sensing. Intuitives tend to see a pattern really clearly, but not always know how they got there. But they tend to be good storytellers. They can spin a yarn about a future state that's very convincing and compelling and feels very real. Where S tends to be more data driven, more bottoms up, which is like, hey, I can't get to a conclusion without assembling all the facts. And it's very rare for someone to have both of those attributes, the attention to detail needed to get a complex process correct, and the sort of soaring, inspiring narrative arc that allows you to bring people along. Generally, good founders are able, and again, I think there's an Amazon attribute, which is like stay in the details. Sure, it's great to, as a leader, to be able to tell stories and inspire people, but never forget that the story is built up of details, and hold yourself accountable to get as deep in the weeds as is needed to ensure that the organization or the quality is working. And every again, it's a leadership attribute to be able to hold those ideas in your head at the same time. Often good founders are better at the storytelling than they are at the details. And back to the example of the co-founder thing, it's very common for founders who are brilliant storytellers and fundraisers to partner with somebody who's better at the details than they are, because they know that it's needed. It's not that they think that it can all be storytelling, but they also know they're not that good at it. And so they bring somebody into the business in a high trust, high commitment, high ownership way that can extend their capabilities or the organization's capabilities down to the deepest level of detail.
So you learned a lot of this stuff at Patagonia, right? But after that, you moved to learn at Stanford at the Graduate School of Business. I was wondering why that pivot.
Yeah, so the short answer is Patagonia is based in Ventura, California. It was a great place to be, right? I lived in a house on the beach. I was, surfing and running and riding my bike. Like the lifestyle was sort of unmatched, but it was also 95, 96, 97, and I could feel the energy of the internet happening, and I knew it's what I wanted to be working in. And as long as I was carrying this project forward on bringing the Patagonia brand and store online, I was like, okay, this is productive work. I'm in the work in a way that feels directionally right to me. But I could just feel the pull of really Silicon Valley and this and the center of gravity that was all the energy up there. And I basically told myself, look, I'm only going to apply to one school, which is Stanford. If I get in, I'll go. If I don't, I don't know what I'm going to do. And lucky enough for me, I got in. What it allowed me to do was sort of have a way to get myself up to San Francisco and in on basically adjacent to Sand Hill Road to sort of learn, but without a clear commercial attachment, that was the dissatisfying part. Was I learned better in a high stakes environment than I do in a school environment. School feels sort of theoretical to me. The lucky thing for me, again, I went to Stanford, was enrolled for, I don't know, 3, 6 months. And the guys that I'd hired as my outside software engineering vendor for Patagonia moved their company from Wisconsin, which is where they started it, to San Francisco for the same reason. Like San Francisco was the gravity well around the version V1 of the internet. So pretty quickly, I started spending time with these because I had been their first e-commerce customer, their biggest flagship brand customer. So I was like the story that allowed them to build their business. And they were just fun guys. We enjoyed working together. And so I pretty quickly I was like, I can stay and sit in a classroom and read about the internet, or I can quit and join these guys as a partner in their business and grow that business and see how far we can take it. So it became a pretty easy decision for me to be like, I'm sure Stanford's a great brand and I'm sure I'd learn more, but I'm really probably better off for my temperament in the field. And so I dropped out after my first year, joined these guys as a partner, and then wound up scaling and selling that business sort of in the middle of it was Again, in retrospect, it makes sense. At the time, it was probably less legible to me, or it felt scarier. But I was very glad to be a practitioner in the middle of the first internet bubble, as opposed to being kind of sitting in the classroom and experiencing it theoretically. I feel like I learned much more powerful lessons that way than I would have in the abstract in classroom, kind of in Silicon Valley, but studying as opposed to doing.
Yeah, I mean, being at that time during the bubble, it's incredibly um, informative, probably more than a school. But I was wondering about the culture in Silicon Valley. How did the culture in Silicon Valley back then compare to the culture in Seattle? And then why did you drop out, or actually eventually after adjacency, why did you move back to Seattle?
Yeah, so good, really good questions. And again, it sort of gets to the why of why do I do what I do now? But let me kind of bring you through the journey, which is, Silicon Valley was obviously the place to be doing the internet in the late 90s. Like there was sort of nowhere else in the world that was the center of gravity for that work. And so having, done what I did, went to school, dropped out, be a part of this business, scale the business, sell it to a public acquirer, kind of live through the post-merger integration. A lot of the sort of culture of Silicon Valley was that what I was doing, it was a little bit out of step with what was happening in the academic environment, because most people go to get an MBA as income insurance. Like it's not something that entrepreneurs tend to do. If you're an entrepreneur, you tend to do something entrepreneurial, and school is more like I'm going to check a box and get a certificate so that I'm legible to employers, blah blah blah. But the choice that I made was not a weird choice in the context of my peer group in Silicon Valley. Everybody was doing things that were leaning into whatever. Like if you had drunk the Kool-Aid and felt the internet was going to be a big deal, people were starting companies, they were making investments, like they were. It was in the water. And so it was very satisfying to feel like you sort of found your people in that sense, and to be part of a community that shared your idea about how the future was going to be, and what actions you could take as a professional to participate. Having sold the company and then working for and it wasn't a big company. The acquirer was a company called Sapient. They had recently gone public themselves. There were probably about 2,000 people, but it immediately felt the sort of deceleration in the molasses of bringing along an organization and helping it build a new skill set. And like it was important work to deliver value for the acquisition. And so I spent a couple of years doing it, but I was restless to get back to the, the kind of more grassroots or ground level work of entrepreneurship. But so I had met and was living with a woman that I'd met in graduate school. She had finished the program and was working for a consulting firm. We were living in San Francisco, and we sort of were like, is this the environment we want to be in for our lives longer term? My parents were still alive then and living in Seattle. Her parents were in Oregon. And so we made a life decision, which is, where do we want to be longer term? Like if we're gonna stay together and build a life, do we want that life to be in San Francisco? Or do we want the life to be in Seattle? And so the choice to move to Seattle was really personal. It was where I was from, where my family was, where I thought I could build a more balanced life for myself in the long term. San Francisco was and is very careerist, very money oriented, very ambition driven. And those are aspects of my personality, but not the whole thing, or I didn't want them to be the whole thing. So that choice was a choice that I made, sort of knowing I was leaving behind a very committed community of entrepreneurship. And I didn't know Seattle as a professional in that way. When I moved here, I didn't know what to do with myself at first, and then wound up meeting some people who were more entrepreneurially minded, and that led to founding a company in Seattle in the 2000s, where we raised money from a local firm and then from a Bay Area firm. But and that's a journey unto itself. But the other sort of meta journey was, God, is it hard to be a founder in Seattle? Like Seattle is really a company town. It's a lot of brilliant people who build amazing products, but generally in the context of a scaled enterprise like an Amazon or Microsoft. Not that there weren't founders, but the community of founders was very much the kind of out in left field, like weirdo. Like it was not the center of the energy, if you think of it. And I think what was so frustrating about being a founder here was that sense of isolation, and everything was harder. Like raising money was harder, recruiting was harder, getting media attention was harder. And being a founder is hard enough. Why should an environment not have a more kind of supportive framework, or support systems for founders that are trying to do this hard thing? And that was really the impetus for starting the fund, Founders Co-op. The name of the fund really came from our initial investor base. Were all exited founders in the Pacific Northwest who had shared this experience of like, God, is it hard to be a founder here? And I just was willing to spend more time and kind of tug on that thread harder. But they were willing to put their money behind it and their networks behind it to help us try to figure out, is there a way to be more supportive of high performing founders that have chosen for whatever reason to live in this market? And that's really the why still today behind why I do what I do.
I want to click into your thoughts on legacy and community to continue on that sort of train. You've said that you believe that names fade, but communities is what like endures, and that bettering the durability of Seattle is the real legacy for you. I was wondering what led you to this worldview.
I mean, I think some of it is just like fatalism. Partly it's getting older, right? Which is like you realize that no, you can feel very important in your life if you're working hard and people know who you are, and that feels very kind of warm and fuzzy and gratifying. But when you look around you at other people who have had illustrious careers and now they're post career or they're no longer alive, and the world moves on, right? And that's, I think it's something you come to terms with as you kind of go through your life journey, is what I'm doing feels really important to me, but the arc of history is long, and the arc of business is long, and like what really matters in life, and how important is it really that what I'm doing, or that people know who I am, or remember my name. And I think you just start to develop a more abstract sense of like what causes positive change in the world. And it tends to be systems that are built or institutions that are built. And sure, leaders along the way are necessary to build those things. But if you build vibrant systems or vibrant institutions, that is the through line for performance. No individual in any one of those matters. Like like Jeff Bezos, who's no longer the CEO of Amazon, built an extraordinary machine, but he has now left that machine, and he's recently announced he's co-CEO of a new thing. The machine continues, and the machine is what allows the impact to be carried forward, not Jeff Bezos's focus or attention on the machine. So, like I'm no Jeff Bezos. I do a little thing in a small town and try to do some good, but that awareness of we're all going to die, and what matters is trying to do some good. And if you can make that good more durable than yourself, that's a way of carrying forward something that you think is important and valuable. That that that's the abstraction that I think you have to do to try to figure out how to make the good you want to do last beyond your own attention.
So, what are some examples of that? I know that you're big into civic participation, but also so talk about that and also the entrepreneurial side of it as well.
Yeah, so I think like it's worth talking about, and we've talked about some cities, San Francisco and Seattle in particular. Cities are they have cultures, right? That they inherit through centuries of who immigrated there and what industries were built there, and what's the topology and the climate and all those things, like those all shape a city's culture. But cities are also, or cultures are made by institutions. And if you think about what Seattle was when I was graduating high school, so I graduated high school the year Microsoft went public, 1986. So it was a private company in that year. It didn't have the impact that it does now. And what Seattle is now, with Amazon, Microsoft, what the University of Washington's CSE program has become, what the Gates Foundation has been able to do because of the wealth created, and really all of the wealth creation and all the institutions that have been built by the wealth and the employment and the skills that were drawn into this geography by those institutions. Seattle's a fundamentally different place because of the entrepreneurial successes that happened in my lifetime in the city. And so if you think about cities as living, breathing organisms with a long arc of performance, the best way to shape a city or the future of a city is to help create institutions that can have that scale of impact, right? So if you want to help entrepreneurs in Seattle, sure, you can make some money and you can help individuals on their journey, but you can aspire to have the impact of what an Amazon or Microsoft had done, which is like, what kind of companies will be built here in the next generation, and how will that shape what kind of talent is drawn to the city, what kind of ambition the city has, what kind of story does the city tell about itself? Entrepreneurs are the seed corn of that future harvest of narrative and employment and success. So to some extent, the work that I do with entrepreneurship is attached to, what do I aspire for the city of Seattle, which is to continue to be a place that's magnetic to talent around the world, that has global impact, that produces companies that in my opinion at least have done significant good in the world for their customers and for others. People have different opinions about that. One of my great frustrations about Seattle, and this is maybe a microcosm of a frustration about the city sort of or the economy writ large, is Seattle is a little ambivalent about some of its success. Some of the success has been so outsized, and frankly, some of the wealth that was created is so disproportionate to what the typical person who might not work in tech has experienced, that a lot of people in Seattle are sort of resentful of, or angry about, or dismissive of what that industry has done to the city, and sort of wish that we could go back to forestry and marine, shipping and fishing and services, sort of the bucolic, I would say, false nostalgia for a bygone era of the city, instead of saying, hey, this is where we are now. How do we make it work for everybody? So the politics of the city, I think, to some extent, are wrestling with, and you've seen it in the recent mayoral election and city council elections, the push and pull of what kind of a city do we want to be? Who is the city for? Does it serve everyone? And there's lots of legitimate issues up and down the spectrum, but that becomes another thread, which is if you engage only in the commercial, entrepreneurial, capitalist side of it, and ignore the civic leadership and civic responsibility and civic engagement side of it, you wind up kind of only understanding one side of the story. So for me, I've enjoyed, and it's been important for me to participate as a private citizen in the civic discourse, and try to understand and have more empathy for the whole spectrum of opinion about what kind of city are we trying to create and who's it working for, so that it's a more of a collective enterprise of what we're trying to do here, and not just like, hey, if you aren't on the side of hypercapitalism, you got your head in the sand, and it's not going to work. You really, to build a functioning society, which I think we all want, you have to look at the whole spectrum of opinions and try to have empathy for different viewpoints, and see if you can bring the whole collective to a better place, not just carry water for your team.
So how are you working to align these two like collectives, or how, these two factors into one collective, the like environmentalist and sort of entrepreneurial sides?
Yeah, I mean, again, like these are small things, and they've been important for my exposure. I don't think they've made a particularly big impact, but for many years I've been involved with the University of Washington. I've been, God, I don't know how long it's. I could, and LinkedIn would tell you, I've been part of something called the University of Washington Innovation Roundtable, which is a bunch of private citizens, entrepreneurial and investor folks that work with the U on how does it participate in the innovation ecosystem, what kind of talent, what kind of initiatives is it supporting and endorsing, both through its research initiatives and its more commercialization efforts. So that's been a really rewarding and fun, exciting way for me to see what the role of an important civic institution like the university, what role does it play, and how does it think about its role in that. Years ago, I was the chair or co-chair of an economic development commission for the city of Seattle, which is what is the role that the city can play in supporting innovation and entrepreneurship in the city, and how does that weave into the city's priorities and the fabric of the city, and all the competing agendas that the city has to, the different constituencies the city has to serve in its work. And then most recently, for the past 8 years or so, I was a board member for an organization called Friends of Waterfront Seattle, and that organization was a private fundraising and communications arm to try to create, when the Nisqually earthquake happened, and the viaduct became unstable or unsound. We knew the viaduct was going to go away, and the question is, what do we as a city want to happen on the waterfront? What does that say about us as a community, about how we welcome newcomers or outsiders or tourists? What is the physical relationship of the waterfront to the downtown? And what story do we want to tell ourselves about the kind of city that we live in? In the end, that organization raised about $170 million of private money, in combination with a lot of transportation and other dollars, to create the new waterfront park, which for me is a transformation of how the city presents itself to the world, and I think and how citizens in Seattle experience and live in the downtown and the waterfront area. So again, small things, small contributions, but have given me, I think, a richer sense of how does the whole city of Seattle think about the role of innovation, entrepreneurship, and capitalism in creating a city that works for everyone, not just for those who happen to be participating in the success of our biggest technology companies.
A little bit of a pivot, but something I've been thinking a lot about is that, uh, and also like my friends as well, is that a lot of good ideas or opportunities for startups, um, they feel gone. It feels like all the good ideas are gone. What are your thoughts about that?
So we know where we talked about the characteristics of good entrepreneurs. I would say that the only thing that would cause opportunities to dry up would be for curiosity to dry up, meaning that good entrepreneurs the world's changing all the time, right? It's changing because people's values change, because the complexion of the the citizens change. People growing up have different experiences. So the needs of people or the needs of companies evolve as technology and social mores and consumer or individual preferences change. So it's impossible to run out of ideas because the world is always changing, driven by all the things we've talked about: immigration, entrepreneurship, politics, climate. You pick one. So it's only when people, I think, are intensely curious about for me, the intersection of technology and money, or technology and capitalism, has always been a fertile place, because as technology changes faster than anything, it's been one of the kind of, in our lifetimes, one of the steepest arcs of destabilizing change in the world. So that's not the only place. Climate, I think a lot of people believe, is going to be another accelerating, destabilizing arc. Anytime there's a destabilization, it's going to create needs, problems, opportunities. Think, describe, use whatever word you want. If those are if you're intensely curious about how technology or how climate is creating discontinuous change, and you really lean into what is it about that change that's actionable for me as a technologist, or as a citizen, or as an entrepreneur, or as an activist, pick one. You can't not find problems to solve. I mean, read the newspaper. The world is full of problems to solve, and entrepreneurship takes many different forms. Civic entrepreneurship, equally to capitalism entrepreneurship. So I don't think the world is out of ideas. We may be at a low point of people being intensely curious or feeling hopeful. I mean, another thing you have to believe is that my agency will matter. And one of the things that's most concerning, I think, about the current generational cycles, I think a lot of people are feeling hopeless, not feeling energized, not feeling that they have agency, that the world is happening to them. One of the greatest erosionary factors in entrepreneurial energy is that sense of passivity, that the world is happening to me. And one of the things that you look for in founders is a sense of agency, that even if the world is telling me I can't, or it's not possible, or the cards are stacked against me, I believe differently, and I'm going to show the world differently. So if you believe you have agency, or that the world has problems to solve, there is something for you to do as an entrepreneur.
How can the next generation of students reclaim that agency, that even though they feel hopeless?
I think God, I wish I had a good answer to that question, right? It's almost more of a I actually let's create a constructive action, which is telling people to change themselves is not very helpful, right? You are who you are. You've had the experience you've had. Changing your peer group, or like seeking out people who have agency and are seeking a community of high agency people. And again, whether like your startup club, right? I don't know how many folks you have in it, or what your sort of heuristic is for collecting people into that organization. But startup clubs are a great vector for people who think entrepreneurship is interesting and want to be around the kind of people who believe that they can make a difference. There's other kinds of agency, again, political agency. You might have an activism group, or a climate action group, or whatever it is. But surround yourself with high agency people, and it will increase your own confidence that you have agency and that you can make a difference. If you surround yourself with cynics, or people who are passive, or people who are just opting out and saying, I can't do anything, so I'm going to stay home and play video games, you will fall into that pattern. You are the average of the five people you surround yourself with. Surround yourself with high agency people.
What is a question that you would have students ask themselves if they are interested in startups, but they're not really sure, like they're just generally interested? What is a question that you'd have them ask to sort of see if they want to pursue that entrepreneurship field?
Yeah. So one action that, again, like growing up, I was an introverted kid. I was always abashed about reaching out to people, or embarrassed about, like, am I whatever, like, am I going to come off like an idiot, or do something stupid? And I've gotten better about that. And not that I don't still have those impulses, but one of the best ways, I think, to feed your own curiosity is to engage with people who might be a year or two or 5 or 10 ahead of you in their journey of discovery, and just reach out to people. I mean, you reached out to me and said, "Hey, can you have a conversation?" And the answer was yes, because that's part of what I do, and it's part of what I enjoy. Encouraging everyone to not just sit and think and read and stew in their own kind of cognitive juices, but be proactive at finding people. And again, they don't have to be Jeff Bezos. They can be people who are in your club at a couple years ahead in school or recently graduated but started something interesting. Reach out and say, hey, I noticed what you're doing. I think it's cool, or I'm curious. Can you give me 30 minutes of your time to just tell me about how you did what you did? Not only will you learn about their journey, you'll build a relationship with somebody who might take an interest in you and what you want to do and find a way to unlock an interest of yours. So that, like, surround yourself with people not only in your social group, but reach outside your social group and ask for time from people whose journeys you find interesting. You'd be surprised how often they say yes and how that unlocks things for you in ways you didn't expect.
I think to end it off, I have a question about for Startup Club specifically, the students and actually all students. How can students in Seattle bring forward the startup culture specifically in our city?
It's a good question. I think the hard part about being a student is and I know because my kids are in college right now, like it's a very absorbing, right? You always have something due or some, meeting to go to or a club event you got to do. It's like it's a very busy time. So I would say the most important thing to do particularly as an undergraduate is just have a lot of experiences. I mean, academic in particular, but academic and social or other, and try to harden your sense of what matters to you because I think like the best professional journeys are authentic journeys, and the more you can advance your own understanding of what you're good at and what you're drawn to, and again, I'm very much very much a believer in you can grow in lots of different ways, but you probably by the end of your college career will have a sense of what your unique superpowers are, and it's not that you abandon the attempt to continue to learn and grow in lots of ways but figure out or develop a hypothesis about what are your unique strengths as an individual, as a human, as a professional, and find ways to lean into those strengths early on. And so, really, as an undergraduate, I think having a conscious journey of like, look, I'm going to try a lot of things. I'm going to take a lot of classes and a lot of disciplines. I'm not just going to lock in on whatever I happen to be good at today, but I want to work towards an understanding of what I think my unique gifts are at this age and at this stage in my life. And then I'm going to find a way to use those gifts because in my experience, doing something you find joyful, it doesn't, and again, this whole like find your passion, I'm not sure I agree with that, but doing work that feels like the work you were born to do, even if it's hard and challenging and frustrating, is the best way to show excellence. And I think excellence is the best thing to pull you through and again, like like feeling excellent, feeling accomplished, feeling like you're stretching yourself. Figure out what that thing is for you, and then find a place in the world where you get to do that more often than not. Every job is complicated. Everything has compromises, but lean into and tug on the threads of your own motivation. And I think that will carry you forward and not to places you will surprise you because you will experience the joy of doing something that you find intensely interesting, and your joy will allow you to be successful.
Thank you so much for that insight. Do you have any final words you want to impart upon students?
No, no, I think that last topic was sort of I think the capstone one, which is
Awesome.
like find your own journey and pursue it and don't let people tell you otherwise.
All right. Thank you for the conversation.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for the time.